advocacy.com. All right. So today I'm going to start and really be sharing my own story, where I came from, where I really came from, and how I got here in Toledo and kind of what led me back to this place. I'm the president and co-founder of Midstory. Check us out at www.midstory.org. We do all kinds of storytelling work, and I'll talk a little bit about how my own story really intersects with the work that I do here locally. Really, what I want to explore today is this concept of home and what it means to find home, to be proud about your home. Specifically, we talked about Northwest Ohio and Toledo, Ohio, right? What does that really mean to be from this place and to find this place as home? And I think there's two really, I would say, understandings that you can think about home, right? It's a physical location. It's a place. That's a very physical understanding, but there's also that metaphorical sense of what it means to belong in a place, right? What it means to feel at peace or finding some form of satisfaction being in a place like Northwest Ohio. And I think that's probably more critical and even more important. But my story kind of begins 7,000 miles across the ocean in Kaohsiung, Taiwan, where I was born. I moved to the States when I was 5 years old. But it's a really quite fascinating story how I really came to the United States. I always say my parents are extremely peculiar people, and I still stand by that today. They didn't come to this country because they were searching for the American dream. They didn't come to this country because of a promise of a job or a career or a better education. They actually came to this country because of a single phone call. But I really won't get more into that. If you're interested in the details, you can ask me after this presentation. They dropped full-time careers. They dropped their jobs. They dropped their house in the city in Taipei to come to the United States with a 6-month visa with 2 kids, myself included, right? Some would call them reckless, right? Some would call them crazy. I think maybe it's a little bit somewhere in between, right? What I didn't understand as a 5-year-old at the time, is and what I have now come to define this moment as a journey of faith, of a calling faith, right? And I'm standing here now, as many years later after the fact, right? As what I would reckon is a certain kind of vindication for my parents' reckless and crazy journey across the sea to Cleveland, Ohio, where I first settled. So, growing up in the States, we first settled in Cleveland and moved to Toledo very early on. Growing up in the 90s, I would say is very different than growing up as an Asian American today, right? Today we have globalization, we have pop culture, we have social media. I think Justin pointed to a lot of those things. And certainly in the 90s, I always think about the show, Eddie Huang's show, right? Fresh off the boat. Those experiences are very similar to my own experiences, like bringing weird lunches to school and those kinds of things. But I would actually say and argue that I've had a very quintessential Midwest experience and childhood here. I grew up in the cornfields, running around, bonfires, climbing on roofs, watching fireworks. Because of the nature of my parents' job in the area, I would spend a lot of time wandering neighborhoods and all kinds of rural places across Ohio. So that's really how I grew up. Went to Sylvania Southview, so go Cougars, for my high school. Was in music, very much involved in music. So Toledo very much became my home at the time. I think it's really important to note that when I first came, my parents told me that they actually never enrolled me into any kind of Chinese language school, and they did that on purpose. It's funny. My parents came in. We moved in a small apartment in Perrysburg, and they handed me and my sister a dictionary and told me to memorize it. So that's really how I grew up, was memorizing the dictionary. And later on, that got me far. I graduated from Southview as valedictorian, and I got admitted to Princeton University, where I spent the next 4 years of my collegiate experience. And so led me from Toledo all the way to Princeton, New Jersey, right? Funny enough, my sister and my wife also graduated from Southview and also went to Princeton University. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But when I went to Princeton, it certainly is an eye-opener, because you realize very quickly how much you feel, not only as an Asian American, the difference that you felt in Northwest Ohio, right? But you also felt very different because you were Midwesterner, right? There was a certain level of privilege I grew up as a low-income immigrant household. When you step away into a place like the East Coast, and it's funny because my roommate was a football player. He was a varsity football player, and he would have a maid come in to clean our room. So it was a really interesting dynamic to be surrounded by people with totally different levels of privilege. And that got me thinking about what exactly was home to me. Was it Taiwan? Was it Toledo? Was it now Princeton, New Jersey? What do I really identify myself as? And I think it's a really an interesting and important question to be asking. For sure, I got made fun of because I used the word pop instead of soda and all those things that people associate the Midwest with. But I'm very happy and proud to be from the Midwest. There is a famous Princeton motto that we graduated from. It's carved in the medallion in front of Nassau Hall, right? It says, "In the nation's service and the service of humanity." And I think that really, embodies kind of my own experience when I was at Princeton, and also why I'm standing here 8 years. I moved back to Toledo 8 years ago, and I'm still here doing the work that I do at Midstory. There was a really nagging feeling when I was out in Boston. I was working in Boston. I graduated with a degree in policy, and I was thinking to myself, what am I doing? Am I going to be out on the East Coast forever? Am I really making impacts? Am I really doing something that I feel that really could be substantial to the community that helped me get me out there in the first place? I think of Jim Croce's very famous song, "New York's Not My Home." Though all the streets are crowded, there's something strange about it. I lived there about a year, and I never once felt at home. So in 2018, I returned to Toledo. I dropped my full-time job and pursued for graduate programs. And Ruth, Logan, Alex, and we all returned to Toledo, Ohio to start Midstory. And just like my parents, some might call me crazy, some might call me reckless. Maybe it's somewhere in between. And that's Midstory. Those are Alex, Logan, Ruth. You might recognize some of them if you're familiar with our story. We started Midstory about 8 years ago, and I'm really going to go through this really quickly. We're a nonprofit organization. We focus on storytelling for the Midwest because just like my experience as an Asian American in Ohio, people also have a kind of misconception of what it means to be from the Midwest, especially from the coasts, right? So we have a responsibility to be able to tell that story in both a responsible and authentic way. So it's not just our Asian American experience, but even our experience as part of the Midwest. And I think that really needs to be expounded and probably clarified, especially given the current administration where we are currently now. So our focus is really on progressing the Midwest story. At Midstory, we really focus in 3 specific areas: educational storytelling, solutions-oriented research, as well as our young people programs. I will kind of speed right through this. We do a lot of research. We're somewhere in between public media and a think tank. And the work is really important, as I say, because it really brings together the various dialogues and narratives that we have in Northwest Ohio, celebrates them, uplifts those stories, and hopefully we're able to find that balance of that ecosystem that we live in today. The last thing I'll share is our Think Lab programs. Hopefully this will play. If not, these are some of our students that we bring in every year. If you can hear that. Hometown. That's it.
Hi, I'm Abigail. I'm a rising senior at Princeton studying history, and I'm from Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Hi, I'm Ruby. I'm a rising junior at Northwestern University, and I'm from Langford, Pennsylvania.
Hi, my name is Cindy Nathan, and I'm a rising senior at University of California, San Diego.
My hometown is Westport, Connecticut. Los Angeles, California.
Ashland, Oregon. Hangzhou, China.
I had to pick one word to describe the Midwest. It would probably be home. Because I'm from here.
Flat.
Less sweeping.
Empty.
I just find it it becomes so expansive and wide. The first day I got here, I went into the middle of some train tracks and kind of stared down them. I could almost stare to the horizon, it was that wide, cold.
It's a very quiet place. I think that was probably because of all the media portrayals of the Midwest as sort of standing in for any sort of suburbia.
Far, friendly, vast. Before I came to college in the Midwest, I didn't really hear about the Midwest ever before, so to be fully honest, I'd say unimportant.
I chose mid-story because I want to sharpen my writing, research, and interview skills. Like a very nice community.
The mission at mid-story really resonated with me.
To learn more about a community that really needs more coverage while honing my skills as a journalist.
It's an area where there's not a lot of community-oriented research and problem solving. Coming from the Midwest, I really like that show.
Interested in multimedia storytelling.
I really wanted to experiment with what I already know and learn some new things.
I always love watching those videos of our interns. So we bring about 30 to 50 students every year, depending on summer, winter, and fall cycle. We bring them here to the Midwest to kind of explore this place and get their impressions, but hopefully to get them part of that storytelling process. I'll skip beyond this to this last few pictures. So just a few months ago, I actually returned to Taiwan after 10 years. I haven't been back to Taiwan for about 10 years. And, I've heard legends of this story about this pharmacist that my parents, we basically were raised in the back area of this, specifically my sister was, when they were serving out in the countryside in rural Taiwan. And we actually walked in to this pharmacy after hearing about this all my life, right? And this is the picture of the pharmacy in the background. It seemed very surreal at the time. Everything was cluttered, nothing was cleaned, but somehow in all that disarray, there was some kind of perfect order that the pharmacist could find anything in the shelves that he really wanted to find. I was thinking about this, and in the back, you'll probably see the calligraphy of my dad when he was still in Taiwan. It's still hanging up in the wall in the same place about 40, 50 years later. And we came back to that moment in time. There's this room is where they live. There's a kitchen in the back. In the back, there's a little nook that my sister used to sleep. It's literally a dark corner now full of random kitchen appliances. And that's kind of how I could have grown up. I think those decisions you really take for granted in life. That maybe if my parents never came to the United States, I would be living in an environment such as this. And my parents reminded me, actually, a good friend of ours when they were there is now on the streets selling bubble tea. And I think of a lot for myself, for the journey that I've come and where I am today. Maybe I would also be selling bubble tea on the streets if not for that one strange, crazy, and reckless decision that my parents made to come to the United States. And hopefully we're also making weird and crazy and strange and reckless decisions all the time. But I really think, going back to the motto of Princeton, having a heart and service for all of humanity is why we're here and why we're gathered here today. So I really want to thank Dr. Ha to provide this opportunity for us to share our story. And thank you.